Good morning.
Good morning.
How you doing?
I'm awake here on Monday. That's all good.
All right. I'm hearing myself echo for some reason.
I'm not hearing it on this end.
Okay, good. Ah, and I'm getting the delay. All right. It's all happening. Let's see. There we go. All right. So how's life treated you the last week, Bob?
Well, I haven't done much. I've been kind of lazy and not feeling all that well. So basically, I haven't done a whole bunch. So there you go.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sorry to hear you're not feeling well.
Well, hopefully it's getting better.
Yeah. Can I be nosy and ask what's going on?
Well, I have occasional pancreatitis, and every now and then it sneaks up and slaps me aside the head and just puts me down for a day or two,
Okay.
and then I get recovered. But it takes time. The recovery seems to be getting longer each time. But anyway, the gastro. Whatever he is, a guy is taking some blood and going to do some extra work and see what's going on.
Okay. So when that flares up and it bothers you, I mean, what kind of symptoms or how do you know?
Stomach, intestinal pain, tiredness.
Okay.
Basically, it just you lose your appetite, and so you don't feel like eating anything. So that's kind of where it sneaks up on you.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. I've never actually spoken to anybody who had any actual problems, with that. So I was kind of curious as to how that sort of shows itself.
And the sad part about it, you try to kind of track your eating habits and see if something has caused it, and there's nothing that pops out at all. So it just kind of all of a sudden, bang, you've got a problem, and just have to kind of cool it for a couple of days, and then it goes away. So.
Yeah. So when you say cool it for a couple of days, I mean, what does that sort of entail? Is it like a change in diet, or you just cut back on eating, period? Or I mean, how does that?
Well, actually, basically, it's mostly rest. I I don't feel like doing anything at all. So the painting stays on the easel and doesn't get anywhere, and the drawing doesn't get anywhere. And I sit there and I said, geez, I need to get up and do something and do about it. But then, the get up and go doesn't get up and go.
Right. Yeah. You don't have the energy to do it. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
But, I mean, do you do anything to modify your diet during that period of time?
Well, I've never discovered anything specific that causes it. So, what do I modify?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I was just wondering, I mean, maybe because you were talking about having a loss of appetite, whether, maybe you just cut back, on what you eat or something, just by the nature of you don't feel like eating.
Yeah.
Whatever. So.
It is what it is. I live with it, and there you go.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for the info. I mean,
well,
I'm always curious, as to, different, I mean, different things that people go through and how it kind of presents itself and, how they kind of cope with it, maybe because I'm on my road, on the road there myself, at some point. So,
well, I've learned keep as much as you can for as long as you can.
Oh yeah. 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 yeah, I basically, you know, my goal is I want to leave with as many parts intact as possible.
Yep. Yep.
You know, so that's just a personal thing, you know. Anyway, looks like we're getting a few folks here. Okay. We have a whole some of those. Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
How we doing?
Fine. It's good to have
You're
you back.
here.
Do you miss us?
Great.
Okay. Well, it's good to be back. Thank you, Armando. You know, and you know, I wanted to do a couple things today, and I wanted, first of all, you know, I wanted to compliment the group on a couple of things. Some of you have sent in some of the things that I've asked about, which is like a short paragraph or whatever. And some of you have actually sent in some artwork of yourself. Others have sent in photographs, and that's fine too. And so that helps. There's still a lot more of you out there that haven't. And so I want to encourage you to try to get that done because sometime this week, I would like to get that all put together into a cohesive package, you know, so that we have that as part of the actual presentation of the artwork. And, you know, people can begin to get a sense of, you know, who's producing the art and what, you know, what their motivations and goals are. Okay. So that would be my one ask for the week, is that you kind of focus on that. And again, it doesn't have to be like real long or complicated. Again, just a short paragraph. And it's really not about the class or anything. It's about you. It's about why do you want to make art? Okay. What is it that motivates you to do this? You know, and it could be, you know, something as simple as, you know, I just enjoy my time painting or drawing or doing ceramics or, you know, creating stuff. You know, you can get as deep into it as you want in a paragraph. I know that can't be very deep, you know, or you can just, you know, kind of make a general statement about it. Okay. But yeah, I mean, getting something from all of you, I think would be good. And we'll try to include that, you know, in the mix. Today, well, the other thing that I wanted to compliment you on is that I got a couple of emails. A couple of people sent in some interesting stuff from wire sculpture, which I think is an interesting thing in itself. Some of the materials that you can work with now to sculpt are really fascinating stuff. But also, Søren sent in a painting, and he didn't tell me who it was by, but if I had to make a guess, it was Felix Voltan. And it was a landscape. And he asked a very simple question. It's like, you know, how can you make this painting better? And so I took some time, and I took it into Photoshop, and I'm going to kind of walk you through several suggestions on how you could actually, you know, improve a painting. And to answer, you know, the question of, you know, has there ever really been a perfect piece of artwork, you know, where everything, you know, was, you know, it was in some way perfect? And the answer is no. You know, it's created by, you know, flawed individuals and people, and there are always things that you could do better. And so, you know, I think if anybody did ever create a perfect piece of artwork, yeah, you know, at that point, it's like, okay, why keep doing it? You know, it's you're not going to do it any better. But reality is no. I don't think there's ever been a perfect piece of artwork, and you can always improve it. And so we're going to kind of go through that a little bit and talk about that this afternoon. I've got a couple of images and slides where I'm modified that painting in several different steps. And that way I can kind of explain to you, you know, what it was that I was looking at and my thoughts, and, you know, and we can have a discussion about it, okay? This morning, you know, since we're looking for inspiration, I'm gonna give you a little bit in the sense of, I've got some actually rather sad news in the world, and that is one of the people who I think have probably been most influential for me for about the last probably 15 years of my life, which is a painter by the name of Richard Schmidt, has just recently passed away. And if you're not familiar with Richard's work, by the end of the day, you will be. And you could really learn an awful lot from, he's got several books out, which, well, you know, they're difficult to find, you know, at this point. People snatch them up. And one, which is, it's called Alafrima. And there's two versions of Alafrima. There's the old version, and then he came back years later and did sort of an extension to it and put a lot of new material in it. That book is probably one of the most difficult books to buy right now, unless you have a lot of money. Because I think they're wanting, I've seen them go for as much as like $400-500, you know. And, you know, even though it's a hardback book, and I love Richard, you know, and his work, I'm not spending $500 on a book on painting. Just won't do it. So, you know, but Alafrima II is the book I'm referring to. And then he's got one called Landscapes, and I think he's got probably about 7 or 8 books out. But you know, all of his books are really informational. There's a lot of wisdom there. I think the old version of Alafrima, which you can probably pick up for, you know, a used version for probably $20 on Amazon or somewhere like that. It's like reading, you know, the Bible to somebody who's really religious. You know, he talks about anything and everything, you know, in that book about being, you know, being an artist, a painter in particular. And there's a lot of insight, there's a lot of wisdom there, and it would be well worth reading, you know, if painting is your thing. So anyhow, I'm gonna start. I'm just gonna show you some of his work, and then we're gonna look at, actually it's a video, and it's not him, it's one of his, should we say, devotees who is going through a kind of a demo on a process, and it's a 3-part video, and so we'll watch that. But I'm going to just begin by sharing some of his work with you. That way you're a little more familiar with it. But can everybody see this lovely young woman's face? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I have to apologize, you know, the quality of these images is rather poor because they were pulled down off of the internet. Some of them are better than others, but they're a little bit grainy and pixelated. But, you know, I think you'll get this a good idea of his approach and his style. Now, the thing about Richard was he was primarily what you consider an Alafrima painter. He didn't do underpaintings. You know, he didn't build a lot of structure. You know, he was looking and putting down color and mixing color and value and intensity, specifically for a particular area of the painting that he was creating at the time. And the thing that's really, I think, notable about his work is it's something that, you know, I've strived for a good number of years and still have yet to achieve. You know, it's this being able to be very direct and very fresh with your work, and yet being very accurate and having it all kind of pull together and you know, feel like a nice solid form. But if you look at anything in Richard's work, um, there are no happy accidents. You know, it's not a Bob Ross approach. It's you know, I mean, things did happen in the paint and the color and stuff, but he was pretty intentional about everything he did. And this is just you know, a pretty good example of, you know, one of his portraits. And again, you know, there are a lot of studies, you know, and very kind of direct, very quick painting. This is another piece of his. And again, you know, it's he had this nice balance of being able to focus on a particular area of the painting, and then, you know, the rest of it kind of went very loose and very abstract. But just, you know, beautiful handling of surfaces, color, value, brushwork was, you know, very kind of free and active at times. You know, his landscapes are stunning, just really amazing. Now, you know, this is a close-up on a painting that he did. And just look at the paint surface, you know, and the color. You know, the color is, you know, amazing in this, you know, with just the little touches of, you know, intensity and, you know, balanced out with those more muted tones. Yeah. Nice sense of light and form. Again, you know, this is one of his landscapes. And again, you know, the color is managed, you know, really nicely. And he's taken, you know, the side of an old barn and these buildings and the rooftop, and he's introduced, you know, colors in there like this turquoise and purple and the orange and stuff that, you know, you wouldn't normally think of a roof of a barn, you know, having those colors in there, but, you know, he pulls it off, you know, really, really well. This is an early painting of his, and this was of his daughter. And, you know, she's also a painter, and his wife, by the way, is a painter as well. So, you know, he did this portrait of her working in the studio. And then one of the things that he's really well known for is his florals. And again, you know, they become, you know, very abstract sorts of paintings, but just really, really beautiful, you know, rich color composition, a lot of movement, you know, they're just alive. And the colors just really, you know, sing. This is a very poor quality reproduction of this painting. But again, you know, just the contrast, the light, the shadow, you know, composition, you know, really, really excellent. And, you know, we talk about this, you know, we've talked about it several times in a couple of different examples of landscape where, you know, I keep kind of emphasizing to you as, you know, as you begin to push things back, the color begins to become more muted, right? Less intense in the distance and more intense in the foreground. And if you look at just the surface of this very, you know, generally you would call it a really passive area of the painting. And, you know, this could have been very flat and very boring. And instead, you know, he's got these little introductions of purple and pink and orange and red in there. plus the contrast of the light kind of filtering through the trees, and the change in value. And it makes this area very exciting. You know? And really, one of the key parts of the painting. The rest of the painting wouldn't work nearly as well without it. They sort of rely on each other. Another one of these, really striking, beautiful landscapes. And, he has a way of handling, natural elements like trees, the sky, the actual sense of the form of the land. This doesn't feel like a flat field, does it? It kind of rolls. It feels rounded, instead of just, flat and straight back. And he was able to get a lot of that in his work consistently. It didn't just happen. Again, another one of these kind of floral still lifes. And again, just look at the brushwork. It looks like brushstrokes. He's not trying to fool your brain into thinking, okay, that looks exactly like a leaf. But that's what you get. You see these shapes and these areas of color as leaves, and yet they're just brushstrokes. That's all they are. And he's not trying to hide that. Again, another figurative piece. I ended up meeting him. I met him actually on 3 different occasions. I met him at the Oil Painters of America. They had a conference. I met him at the American Portrait Society, and he was talking there. And I also met him here at the Atlanta Portrait Society. They had him, come in and do a talk. And just really, really knowledgeable guy. I mean, he was basically a master at everything. Color, composition, values. Pretty much have had it all. Excellent draftsman. This is a really beautiful piece. Again, the quality of the image is not very good, and you lose, I think, a lot of the sensitivity of the color, in the paint that he had in there. Again, just something as simple as, an old stone wall that's kind of dilapidated and an old oak tree. And, he makes a whole painting out of that. And again, it's like, yes, the tree's the focal point, but, he didn't just paint that in green and leave it. He created another interesting element, out of, what generally a lot of people would ignore, when they put it in there. Looks like a nice place to be. Go hang out there for a day or two. Okay. So that was some of Richard's work. Anybody got any thoughts about that?
The most, for almost everything just made you feel good looking at it. I mean, it just, nothing hit you over the head and trying to make some kind of a statement. It was just all just kind of nice, feel good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like it whisks you away into another thought. I mean, you see what's supposed to be there, but there's another element that just whisks you away, and it takes you to another place of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would encourage all of you, during the break or later today, or, write his name down and look him up, and just take a look at a body of his work. You can get better quality images on the internet if you go to his website and things like that.
Last year, you showed us a video of his work called "The Creation of a Masterwork."
Yeah.
So we can go back and revisit that with a different mindset.
Yeah, and I'm going to show you 3 videos in a row, and it's like it's the same thing. It's but it's in 3 parts, and so it will take a little over an hour to view this.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How does a contemporary become so well known and famous and respected for his work during his lifetime? How did he achieve that status?
Yeah, good question. That's a very good question. I wish I knew all the answers to that. I mean, other than being, a phenomenal painter, and he worked for 60 years, almost 60 years. And I mean, he hung out with all the right people, I mean, everybody who was anybody in contemporary painting knew him, and respected him greatly, both as a teacher and just as a painter, I mean, because the thing that guy could do with color and a brush and his grasp and understanding of, how to use those materials to good effect, was something everybody admired. So, Dan Green, Bert Silverman, they all, had a lot of respect for, Richard. And Richard was just a phenomenal guy. But I think I'd say in the last 15, 20 years, he really gained a lot of fame and notoriety in the sense that you had this huge movement of people doing plein air painting. And Alafrima is the approach that most of them, are going to, take with trying to do plein air. And because of that, I mean, he wrote the definitive book, on Alafrima painting. So yeah, he became kind of a household name, just with the release of that book. And that book's been out, I think the first one came out about maybe 20 years ago or so. It was right around, probably around about the late 90s to like 2000 when he released that first, book, Alafrima. I'll have to go back and check the dates on that, but yeah, I think that's about when it came out. And his second version of it, I think it was like maybe 2016, 2017 when he released the new updated version on it. So it had been about 15 years, and lots of people have read that book. If you run in and have any conversations with anybody who paints, and I don't care, what the media is, or if they paint, then a lot of them have read Richard's book. You know? Because there's, again, you know, that book Alafrima is really not just about painting. What it's really about is, you know, living as an artist, and, you know, the things that you experience and go through, and how it sort of affects your view of the world, you know, by pursuing something like that. So anyhow.
And the full name of what?
What was that, Bernice?
What was the full name?
The full name of what?
The painter you're talking about.
Oh, Richard Schmidt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not Schmidt, but Schmidt. S-C-H.
Oh, S-C-H-I-M-D-T.
No. S-C-H-M-I-D. Schmid. Not
Okay.
Schmidt. Okay. All right.
Yep. Richard Schmidt, American artist.
Yep. Okay. So anyway, let's check out these you know, these demos. And let's see. Safari. Yeah, that's not it. Oil painting. Yeah, this would be the one. Okay. Yeah, Richard Schmidt demo. Yeah. And it's funny, you know, you listen to a lot of videos from people talking about Richard, and a lot of people mispronounce his name and call him Schmidt, you know, but it's like, okay. Anyway, here you go.
Hi, it's Mike. I wanted to walk through a painting by one of the most famous artists, contemporary artist that's out there, Richard Schmidt. Famous, been around for many years, and recently I was just introduced to him a couple of years ago, and I find his work stunning. If you don't know about this book, Alafrima by Richard, I would suggest picking it up. It is full of everything about everything as it relates to painting and Richard. I did spend the time, months, to build these color charts one at a time to help give me a better understanding of color and what it means to make color when you're out in the field. But this other book here called The Landscapes is filled with absolutely stunning examples of his work. And he is such a master at architecture. That's really incredible, excuse me. The painting I'm going to be working on, and for me, it's a good reference to try to duplicate what I see and see how a master created some of this work. It's called the Atlantic Sentinel. It's a 16 by 30 oil that he did back in 1970. I just love it. And it seems so simple in how he handles things. His composition is stellar, as you would expect. And that's an area I struggle. So let's get into recreating Atlantic Sentinel by Richard Schmidt.
think he's painting from memory?
No, he's looking at the, at the book, and basically just trying to match the composition. Personally, I think he's doing a little too much drawing at this phase, but that's just me. He's starting off really thin, getting in a lot of his dark values and shapes right now. Okay, on to video 2.
Time to talk about chapter 2 from Alafrima.
No, let's not.
So I highlighted some of my favorite parts. If you could summarize chapter 2,
Right.
it would be.
Where did that? Oh, skip ahead. Okay, yeah, 2. There we go. That's what we want.
Yay.
Sorry, hope you hear me okay. It's a bit windy here on the beach.
Yeah.
I just had a quick tip to share with homeowners.
Would be nice. Notice too how he's holding his brush, holding it back. He's not holding it like a pencil, and he's able to flip that brush and roll it and turn it. Paint right now is real thin. It's not really got a lot of body to it. Looks like you went back and picked up some white or something like that and working it into it now. Beginning to thicken up the paint a little bit.
Is this acrylic?
No, this is oil. Now, one thing I want you to make note of is right now, in looking at the painting as it sits, it's like the sky appears to be dark in comparison to the rest of the painting, like the structure of the building in the foreground, right?
I thought that was a mountain he was trying to paint.
I'm sorry?
I thought there was a mountain that he tried to paint behind that church.
Oh, okay. Oh, no, it's just the sky. So what I want you to notice is as he begins to develop the rest of the painting, and particularly the foreground, how things reverse. And that sky that looks dark right now, you know, it ends up, you know, appearing to be really very, very light.
He's doing this on a white canvas, right?
Yeah. I mean, he put down a kind of a, it looked like maybe a burnt sienna, like just a little bit of a tone overall
Okay.
on it. But it certainly wasn't anywhere close to a middle, like a middle value.
Right.
Now, one of the things that Richard talked about, you know, particularly in the early stages of a painting, was he talked about what they call tuning up the canvas. And, you know, what that basically meant was he was looking at the paint or the scene that he was going to paint, and he tried to lay in a ground that would relate to the things that he was painting. And so, you know, a couple of demos that I saw him do, and I have a CD of his. And, you know, it's mainly just like some grass and a couple of trees. And so he goes in and he puts this green undertone on everything, and then begins to work in on top of that. So in Richard's case, you know, he would change, you know, the color of his ground based on what he was painting, and he would try to find some related color in there, and make that his foundation that he paint on top of. Now at that point, you know, it almost looks like a watercolor, doesn't it?
Yep.
Because the paint is, you know, really pretty thin. Okay. All right, and this is the third and final part of it.
When you get started with watercolor painting, but don't know what supplies to buy, well, in this video, I'm going to share the one thing that matters.
Let's change the position of his camera now.
Is this typical that he's building, did he build the values very, very slowly on his paintings? Was that pretty typical?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Richard would lay in, you know, like the darks and then work, you know, toward the light, which is really what this guy is doing, because this ends up being, you know, really a very white, you know, structure.
What is he doing with the spatula? Is he patting the paint down or something?
No, he's layering on thicker, more opaque passages over these kind of washy darks that he put down, which become the shadows and the midtones, you know, on the building. Yeah. Now somehow, Yeah, there's some marks that are showing up in the video. I don't know where those are from and or why they're there.
Oh.
And it looked like while he was editing it, you know, he was doing something. Who knows? They're not very helpful. But you get a good idea of the contrast between like the heavier paint application and the earlier painting, you know, that was mainly done with a brush, and the paint was a darker value, but generally thinner. So now that he's getting in the foreground, you see how the kind of the field is reversing. The sky looked dark, and now it looks, you know, pretty light.
Does it matter whether you do the sky or the land part first? So you make the comparison whether the sky is too light or too dark, or the land is too dark, too light.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you could go either way. You know, you just have to keep in mind you need to keep that contrast, you know, between the two. You know, in this case, I think it would be easier to get in the sky, you know, first. And that way you can judge how dark you have to make the landmass, you know, to get the contrast. So. The thing I like about what he's doing right here is that, you know, he's beginning to go back in and build in, you know, these different passages of paint layers on that foreground area. And, you know, as he does that, you know, it seems like he's building up paint, you know, little at a time. You know, the paint's getting a little bit thicker, and, you know, it's not as thin and tentative as he's moving forward.
I think he has a unique style with his paint brushes, with his paint strokes. Because
Yeah.
if I did that, it would just look like messy. I wouldn't say, oh gosh, this is not right.
Yeah.
But he has mastered that and everyone expects that from him.
Well, yeah. I mean, Richard's would have been much looser and more direct. You know, this guy's brushwork to me is a little bit busy. You know.
Yes.
Richard had a way of, it was active and it moved really nicely, and it looked like paint that was laid down, but at the same time, it also conveyed the concept or the idea of what he was trying to paint. And he did it very efficiently. This guy's not anywhere nearly as efficient as Richard with his brushwork, but you know, you know, to do a master copy, to try to, you know, do a study and kind of figure out how somebody painted something, you know, I thought this was a good demo. And, you know, it kind of took you through the steps. And, you know, the end result was, you know, it's not Richard's painting, you know, but it's, you know, it's similar, it's close. So, you know, and I think he got the idea of it pretty well. You know, he needs a lot more paint on that foreground. So that's just my humble opinion of it. All right. There we go. So what did you guys think of that? Was that?
Hey there. Hope you hear me okay. It's a bit windy here on the beach. This won't take very long. I just had a quick tip to share with homeowners. There's this new solar panel program out there that's paying homeowners over $2,039 after install to go.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a nice picture of you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that is actually a probably one of the nicest pictures that have ever been taken of me. Here, I'll let you see the real thing again. I won't hide from you. Okay. All right. Can you see me now?
Yeah.
Not nearly as pretty, am I? All right.
You are beautiful.
So the question on the table is, okay, after seeing that video, what are your thoughts? You know, did that look like something that was doable for each of you, or?
Well, it reinforces the notion that I always try to do things too quick. And I want, you know, you go to the end result before you take 2 steps into it.
Right.
And so that just brings the, you know, really hammers home the fact that bring it slowly, do your prep work and make sure that what you're building the color in an appropriate fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Funny, your cover bar. Wait.
Charles,
Yes.
how long do you think the actual painting took that he did for us?
Say.
I would say that he probably did that whole demo probably within about 4 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then we can expect at least 4 or 5 times that amount of time.
No. I mean, no. For what he did, not Richard Schmidt, but for what this guy doing the demo did. No, you should be able to accomplish about the same thing in about the same amount of time.
Okay.
Yeah, any one of you are, or I would say the vast majority of you are as competent a painter as he is.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So.
Really?
That's nice to hear.
Yeah.
That's encouragement.
Yeah, I mean, that's just reality. I mean, you know, you guys have gotten to the point now, for most of you, where you've pushed enough paint around, where you're getting pretty good at mixing color You know, some of you are still struggling with value a little bit. That's not a surprise because that's something that people struggle with for 20 years. You know, seeing value. And that just comes with time. You know, the more you do it, the more you look, you know, the more sensitive you become with it. But no, to do like a master copy or a study like that, you know, my guess is he got out of it what he wanted, which was, you know, he began to understand the proportion and structure and the composition, you know, of that painting. You know, did he really capture the feel of the original Schmidt painting? No, because Richard had a lot more paint, you know, on that surface than he did. You know, generally his paint, he kept it too thin. Most of the brushes that he used were probably a third of the size of the brush that he should have been using. He should have been working, you know, with much bigger brushes, and it would have been a lot more efficient, you know, at covering that surface and layering that paint on there. But again, you know, that's you know, that comes with time and experience, and you know, generally just confidence. You know, and it's difficult because it's something that, you know, painters who've been painting, you know, their whole lives, you know, even me, you know, we struggle with because we get caught up in sort of this idea that every inch of that canvas has to look like something, and we can't just let it be the paint surface. And as you mature and as you get, you know, a little wiser about painting, what you learn, and I guess the pearl of all of this is that the paint surface itself can be interesting, and that you need those abstract, sort of more passive areas of the painting versus the areas where you've put in detail and really made it look like something, and they play off of each other. And there's a symbiotic relationship between the two of them that, you know, make the, you know, the work of art a work of art. You know, it's the thing that, you know, I think pulls you into the painting, because you see the image itself, and then you begin to look at how it was constructed and how it was done. And, you know, and some of you have been to galleries and museums with me before, and I can literally get stuck in front of a painting for a good half hour, 45 minutes, just looking at how it was painted, you know, and seeing the layer of the paint, because really the beauty is there. You know, it's in how the paint went down and how the colors interact, and, you know, how the artist kind of figured that out and put it down there, and didn't overwork it. You know, that's the thing I'm trying to learn right now, you know, even at this stage, is how not to overwork and over detail and just over futz, you know, with my own paintings. So, and I do it all the time. I kill them.
I made
It's really funny because while you were gone this whole week, I was trying to do a self-portrait.
Mm-hmm.
And I started out really light, like this guy did. And then I kept getting it darker and darker till I got it too dark. I must have 20 layers on a piece of paper with acrylic. And it's way too dark.
The good news is you're using acrylic now. You can put light on top of it.
Well, I tried it and it gets darker. I don't know. I think it's picking up the underneath part, even though it's dried. But I worked on it every day, and the colors are not right. But I was just trying so hard to get I guess the features correct. That it just. I may send it to you, but it's not. I don't know what to do with it next. It's just the colors aren't right, and I will it, and it doesn't really. I don't know what it looks like or not. I'm not a good portrait painter. I just.
Okay.
But
Well,
I want to try to do something, but oh, it's terrible.
yeah, well, I haven't seen it, so it's hard for me.
I know. I'm still working on it, and
Okay.
it's looking works
Okay.
every day.
Yeah, but I guess my suggestion to you would be, if you think that certain areas of it are too dark, go back and really look at the reference and figure out where the light is. And wherever the light is, go back in and put a layer of, I would say, translucent or even opaque, white or just a very light color. And then go back and repaint those areas, once you have those lights in there. Let the darks remain, the shadows and things remain the way they are, but go back in and block out, your light areas and go back in and put fresh color on them and try not to get too dark.
Okay. Try that one. Thank you.
Yeah, because
I may send it to you dark before I do try the translucence thing.
Yeah, I would, do that first, so we can kind of look at it and we'll talk about where to go with it, okay?
Charles.
Yeah, Bernice. Yeah.
I may be getting the wrong message, but what I'm hearing is I need to learn a nice paint stroke that I like, and then just incorporate the picture into my paint strokes.
That's an interesting translation of it, but yeah.
It seems like you've been talking so much about how this person paint strokes make them unique and how that person paint strokes make them unique, and so on. So I'm thinking maybe I should, do the picture, but surroundings make it more about a stroke that's unique to me.
Okay, let me see. How do I want to approach this? Okay, first of all, your hand, okay, is not my hand, and it's not Claudia's, and it's not Bob's. And we can take the very same brush, the very same paint, very same color, and we can make a series of paint strokes, and they'll look totally different. And the reason they'll look totally different is because of the mechanics of your hand versus, mine or anybody else's. I wouldn't worry so much about that. That's going to be there anyway. I think the key thing is, find something that you're really passionate about painting. And then I guess if you walk away with anything from the video or what we've been talking about, is try not to treat the canvas the same everywhere, right? Really figure out what it is that's important, to focus on, and focus on that, and then let the rest of it sort of just be, like you said, paint strokes, color, things like that. Let it kind of fade into, a background, and that background could be a suggestion of a landscape, a field, an interior of a house, a window or something, behind somebody, but don't treat that background the same as you would the subject. See? So put more focus on the subject. See, be selective. Yeah, because when you start to paint something, everything can't be as equally important. Otherwise, you end up with, a kind of a overworked flat painting. So, does that make sense to you?
So far, so good.
Okay. All right.
I was thinking about that painting we looked at last week. Who was that? I think it was.
You mean the week before last?
Week before last.
Yeah. Big audit week.
It was a painting, with the green and all that. And hold on a minute. I go look on my wall.
Okay.
Hold on 1 minute.
Yep.
While she's looking, I looked up the book, Alafrima II, and Amazon has it on in paperback at $145. And in a hardcover, they got it for $225.
Right.
And it's, I think on the hardcover, they only had a few left, is what they showed. So.
Yeah, the hardcovers are like really, really sought after. And I've seen them on like eBay and Etsy and stuff like that for, like I said, you know, there was a time where, you know, they didn't have any available for almost 2 years. And so when one came up, you know, it was like $400 or $500.
Right.
It was crazy, you know.
Yep.
I looked for that book a few months ago and it was expensive then, but I would have gotten a bargain if I had known he was going to die.
Yeah, well, yeah.
You just didn't know when.
Yeah, well, yeah, nobody ever knows that.
Like the stock market, it goes up and down.
Yeah, it's always a surprise. And, you know, but yeah, you know, as, you know, I guess, you know, you can always kind of hold out and wait for a bargain, you know, but I guess my thing is, if you really want something, you know, just go ahead and get it, you know, and particularly if it's something that's useful. I've already read the first Alafrima cover to cover, probably about 3 times. And, you know, I don't know how much he added into the second one, you know, but I don't know that I want to go spend, you know, $200 or $300 or however much money to get the second version of it. You know, because I don't know that there'll be that much more there that will be new. So, but then again, I haven't really had a chance to sit down and look through the book. I could be totally wrong. So,
will they be in the library?
That's a good question. You know, you might check with the library system in Fulton County or Cobb or DeKalb or wherever you're at, and see if they have a copy of it. You know, I mean, it's very possible. I mean, it's been out there for a good number of years. So,
are you talking about the Schmidt art book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Alafrima.
I missed the front half of your program.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, he did a book, and I think it was late 90s to like maybe the very beginning of like 2000. And it's kind of like the Bible of, you know, oil painting for anybody who uses an Alafrima approach, and it's called Alafrima. That's just the name of the book.
Okay. What's the name of the book again?
Alafrima, A-L-L-A, and then Prima, P-R-I-M-A, Alafrima.
Alafrima.
Yep. And then about 15 years later, he came out with the second edition, or, you know, an expansion of the book, where he went back in and added material, you know, here and there to it. Again, I don't know how much he added, or, you know, whether it would really be worthwhile to go out and buy the second version or not. And if you can get I guess my suggestion would be, if you can get one from the library, I wouldn't care too much about, you know, whether it was, you know, the original version or, you know, the second edition. I would just get it and read it. You know, I mean, there's a lot in there, and I can also tell you, like I said, I've read the original one about 3 times. It'll take you a month and a half to get through it. You know, because you can't read it and digest. It's not like reading a novel. You know, it's you gotta read it in bits and pieces and kind of just let it soak in, because what he's talking about in a lot of cases is, you know, he's talking about technique, and when he gets into color and the color charts and things like that, it gets a little bit deep, you know, but you'll walk away with a good understanding of the concepts that he's trying to present to you, and it would be worthwhile. So
they also have something called the Alafrima II Companion, which I have, and it's like $180 for the paperback version.
The Alafrima Ii Companion.
Mm-hmm. And it's by him, and then I think the editor is what's her name? Katie Swatland.
Mm-hmm.
Swatland.
Yeah.
Is the.
Do you have it there in front of you?
Oh, no, I've just got the picture of it.
Oh, the picture of it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't, you can't see that. You can't.
Yeah,
No, you can't pick it up.
Now.
Oh.
Okay. Okay.
There we go. There we go.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I haven't heard of that. The Companion. I'm not quite sure what.
Basically, it lists Richard Schmidt's materials, tools, and techniques by Katie Swatland. So it basically isn't by him. It's something that this gal wrote, I guess, and you know, following whatever materials that he has available.
Okay. All right.
The expanded edition, the Alafrima II, they have it for $95 and for the soft copy and $125 for the hard copy.
And that's on where, Amazon, or where are you finding it?
It's under richardsmith.com.
Oh, under his website. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Well, it might be a good time to go there and buy them. Yeah, if they're still on the website for that price, absolutely, yeah. And in fact, I may go there as soon as we get off. Yeah, because for me, I mean, I don't need the hardcover. I would probably get the soft cover anyway. It's more useful to me. Because I just want to read it.
Lightweight and easy to carry.
Well, but also, while you have it in the studio, kind of thumbing through, and putting something heavy on each side of it to keep it open so you can look at stuff while you paint. Yeah, would be more useful to me. But anyhow, yeah, amazing guy.
Before you go, let me tell you what I was talking about, though. If the Monet that we were looking at the week before you left.
Yeah.
Yeah. If when you look at the painting, he's not really painting water lilies. He's not really painting water. He's just taking his same brush strokes and making different things out of the same brush stroke.
Yeah.
At least that's the way. You know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, yes. It's the direction of the brush stroke, and it's all a suggestion. See,
right.
It becomes a lily pad. It becomes water, that's shimmering and moving, because of the way that he used the brush and the color and the contrast and the value. And that's all painting is anyway. It's all an illusion. It's all, at the end of the day, it's a flat surface, and so when they use that term, the illusion is complete. That's what they're talking about. It's those brush strokes and the use of color and stuff. And when you look at it, or when you step away from it at all, it's not brush strokes anymore. Now it's a pond full of lily pads, or it's a mountain with trees, or a sky, or
it could be clouds
or whatever. Yeah. And see, that's kind of that's one of the struggles, I think, in learning how to paint is, and I think it probably comes from the fact that most of us begin drawing, right? And the attempt in drawing is we want to make it look like the thing we're seeing, right? We want to get every little texture and every little pore and crack and crevice, every little bump, we want to describe in that drawing. And then we move into painting and we want to do the same thing. And painting, in fact, is a whole totally different universe and a different animal, in the sense that you have a different material there that has a kind of a beauty of its own, in the sense that, you're applying it with brushes or sponges or some kind of tool and that the material itself has some physical properties to it that can be, you know, just beautiful all on their own. It doesn't have to look like anything. But the amazing thing about painting is that you arrange them in the correct order, and all of a sudden you have this illusion that you have a house there, or you have water lilies, you know, floating in a pond or whatever. And so you get that illusion, but then when you step up close, then you see that it's really just brush strokes and paint, you know. And some people, you know, some artists, you know, they were masterful at how they did that. And that's what makes them masterful, you know, masters as painters, is you see their process, you see their technique, you see how they did it. And at the same time, you know, you've got this beautiful image. So it makes the experience a lot richer. So anyhow, let's see, how are we doing on time? It's only 11:20. Wow, we haven't, you know, we're just a little bit over. Everybody up for one more video? There's one more thing I wanted to share with you. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, and this is not real long. It's about 20 minutes, okay? Let me see, is it? Well, it's 26 minutes. Okay, but we're gonna look at it anyway. And it's well worth seeing. And it's on contemporary, you know, I mean, quote unquote, contemporary painters. You know, how we got into modern painting. So, and it starts off with one of my favorite people, Gustav Klimt. All right, so let's go back from the very beginning on this.
By the first decade of the 20th century, some pretty major changes were taking place in European art. Inspired by the works of the French avant-garde and driven by the process of modernization that was reshaping society, artists increasingly began to reject the styles and conventions of old.
Know that
In their
guy?
place, these artists proposed a new kind of art, one that was more expressive, visualistic, and often a whole lot more confusing than what had come before. This era, which saw more change in a few decades than most of Europe had seen in centuries, was the birth of what we now call modern art. Our subject today, the Austrian painter Gustav Klimt, is an artist whose work exemplifies the changes of this period. His stylish and decorative golden paintings are quite unlike anything else in the history of art before them, and his unabashed depictions of previously taboo topics such as sexuality point to larger cultural changes that would lead artists to portray the human form in new, never-before-seen ways. To really understand Klimt, however, we need to look not only to his works, but also to the environment that produced them, turn-of-the-century Vienna, a city torn between the past and the present. Despite being home to a strictly conservative society so repressive it makes Victorian England look like Burning Man, Vienna was also the birthplace of many new ideas that would shape the 20th century. From the psychoanalysis of Sigmund Freud to the seeds of what would eventually become fascism. This strange culture, which the writer Karl Kraus famously described as the laboratory of the apocalypse, would shape the course of both modern history and modern art. So today, let's take a look at the life and works of Gustav Klimt, Vienna's most famous son, at least so far as painting is concerned, to see what was really going on at the birth of modern art.
Need a new roof? Download this free coupon now and get a new metal roof installed for $89.
I love ads on YouTube.
Klimt was born in 1862 to a large middle-class family in Baumgarten near Vienna. In an example of foreshadowing even I find heavy-handed, his father was a goldsmith, and the young Klimt learned many of the techniques that would much later become synonymous with his work from the family trade. He also displayed a keen ability to draw, and so was enrolled alongside his similarly gifted brother Ernst in the Kunstgewerbeschule, Viennese Academy of Applied Art. There, he learned his trade in the traditional manner, not all that dissimilar from how painters of the past would have, learning technical skills and historical methods that, despite being quite old, were still very much in style in Vienna. Upon graduating in 1883, Klimt found there was no shortage of work for him. The city was in the process of remodeling as it modernized, and many of its newly renovated cultural buildings were in need of murals for their walls. The most famous of these early commissions is the works Klimt created alongside Ernst and their compatriot Franz Macht for the Burg Theatre, which depicts scenes from famous plays and the history of theatre. These works give us a great example of the kind of art that was preferred in Vienna at the time. The style can loosely be termed historicism. Their austere classical surfaces and Baroque details echoes the art of prior centuries rather than their own. which was quite okay with the Viennese nobility, who were similarly fixated on days gone by. As a result, the murals were very well received, and the trio of young painters were even awarded the Golden Cross for their achievement by then-Emperor and human walrus hybrid Franz Joseph. While there are passages in these works by Klimt that anticipate his later interests, overall these paintings are, like the society that produced them, staunchly traditional and perhaps even stuck in the past. This was not a culture that embraced the new. The Viennese aristocracy had trouble with many modern notions like basic human rights and women's suffrage, so it's not surprising they weren't exactly on board for the whole modern art thing yet, despite its rising popularity in other parts of Europe. As the 20th century drew closer, however, Vienna would be faced with a younger generation who were often less concerned with the past and more concerned with the modern day. This would lead to rising cultural tensions and eventually calls for change, aided in no small part by a slew of influential figures who called the city home in those days, from modernist composers like Schoenberg and Mahler to revolutionary doctors like Karl von Rokitansky and Josef Skoda. Not to mention that during this period, Hitler, Stalin, Trotsky, Tito, and Freud all lived in the city within a few miles of each other and even frequented the same coffee shops in what I can only imagine was a much more entertaining version of Friends. Out of all these figures, the one who would have the biggest influence on Klimt and modern art in general is cocaine enthusiast and father of psychoanalysis Sigmund Freud. His delving into the depths of the unconscious, study of dreams, and obsession with suspiciously phallic objects would inspire many artists to make work that didn't just focus on mimicking the appearance of reality, but instead explored the inner workings of the human mind. In addition to this, the process of psychoanalysis itself would also become crucial to modern art as a kind of lens, through which critics, artists, and the public themselves could view and interpret the new art, seeing it variously as a vision of the artist or their subject's inner world, or a way in which we can analyze the workings of our own minds through the analysis of art. Now, these days, many of Freud's ideas are questionable, to say the least. Turns out, basing your theories of the workings of the human mind solely on the study of hyper-oppressed, anally fixated Austrian aristocrats might not be the best idea. But people at the time didn't know that. And so, Freud's influence on art, for better or worse, will be widely felt, and both he and his family will be coming up again and again, from his nephew, Eddie Bernays, the best descriptive term for whom would be total bastard, to his grandson Lucien, who was himself a painter of some repute. Freud's psychoanalysis was, of course, just one of many new ideas doing the rounds at the time that would influence Klimt's work. In addition, there was also artistic movements, such as the post-impressionists of France and the never-ending flow of Japanese art that influenced pretty much everyone. In addition, there was also a new style, known quite appropriately as Art Nouveau. Having emerged from the arts and crafts movement in England and attained near universal popularity in both public and private spaces, Art Nouveau, or Jugendstil, youth style, as it was known in Germany, was interestingly not based in the past, but in the present instead. It even sought to remove the distinctions between high art and low. The flowing whiplash lines, characteristic of the style and its love of natural motifs inspired by nature, were applied in mediums across the board, from so-called low ones, such as poster design, furniture crafting, and jewellery production, to those high arts of painting and sculpture that wouldn't have been caught dead associating with the likes of furniture designers mere decades before. These new styles and concepts must have been a breath of fresh air to Klimt, who had been stuck working in traditional and by this point near outmoded methods up till now. And it wasn't just him that felt this way either. There were plenty of other artists, architects and designers in Vienna who, like Klimt, were looking for something new. As a result, in 1897, Klimt would find himself at the head of a group who declared they were sick of the historicism that dominated Viennese art and, as such, were seceding from the Viennese art establishment. The Vienna Secession, as it fittingly came to be known, is one of the first major formalized breaks with the academic system, where artists themselves chose to exert control and create a distinctly new kind of modern art. The secessionists published their own journal, Ver Sacrum, which offered artworks and writing discussing the new art. They also built their own headquarters, the Secession Hall, which served as gallery, meeting place, and an artwork in its own right, where, much like in Art Nouveau, they attempted to break down the barriers between high art and low, through the combination of art forms working in tandem, from architecture to painting to furniture design, all in pursuit of what they termed a Gesamtkunstwerk, or a total work of art. The secessionist motto, inscribed on the Secession Hall, succinctly describes their goals and their opposition to the art of the past that they rejected. To every age its art, to every art its freedom. Now, for all the high-minded ideals secessionists held, the actual realities of their endeavours don't really match up. They quickly resegregated between those deemed craftspeople and those considered proper artists, or whatever that means. And there's more than a few head cases involved that may require a closer look. But for now, let's examine how the secession would mark a huge change in the work of Klimt. We can see this influence in many works from around this time, such as the famous Beethoven Freeze, a gigantic mural designed for the Secession Hall in much the same way Klimt's early commissions were for other public buildings. This piece, however, was designed to work in tandem with other artworks, and even the architecture of the building, all of which is in line with the secessionist belief in different art forms working in tandem. The frieze also contains many modern elements in its design that set it apart from Klimt's earlier works. The Art Nouveau influence is apparent as Klimt now paints his figures in a stylistic rather than realistic fashion, and gives large parts of the work over to decorative patterns and flights of fancy that, rather than mimicking reality, instead evoke the complexities of life through allegory. This Sasquatch-looking chap here, for example, is Typhon, a mythological beast that, in this case, is said to represent typhoid, a major problem for Vienna at the time. The rest of the figures hold similar allegorical meanings, from disease to lust to voluptuousness, if that is indeed a concept requiring allegory to convey. All told, the work seeks to convey many complex aspects of the human condition, from the search for happiness to the fear of death. The academics of Vienna were, however, outraged by this piece. It wasn't so much the strange style or the unusual composition that got them, but rather the presence of pubic hair in some of the figures, which should give you some idea of the screwed up priorities that led to the secession in the first place. Another secession-related work by Klimt is this one, Pallas Athena, an unusual depiction of the Greek goddess of both war and wisdom, which bears many traits that set it apart from other mythological works. Firstly, Athena is presented as quite androgynous. Her armor, spear, and staring accusatory gaze convey martial power rather than the soft femininity traditionally associated with depictions of goddesses. Her decorative armor with its golden patterns evoke Art Nouveau, while the flat cartoon-like designs in the background and Medusa head in her chest plate create a connection to the art of ancient Greece. Lastly, soft edges and hazy quality create a dreamlike texture that seems in line with the ideas of Freud, who, as we may recall, thought that dreams express our inner desires. The desire Klimt is expressing in this case perhaps being summarized by the tiny figure Athena holds, which symbolizes Nike, the goddess of victory, and in more recent times child labor, and signifies Klimt's desire for the victory of the secessionists over the academics. Such visions may have been optimistic, however, and it wouldn't be long before they got Klimt in trouble, as was the case with this set of paintings commissioned by the University of Vienna from him and Franz Macht in 1900. The theme the university wanted for these works was the typically nerdy Enlightenment motif of light emerging from darkness, conveyed through paintings of the university's most important subjects, philosophy, law, and medicine. What they expected was something along the lines of Berg Theater works. What they got was something quite different. The trouble began, as it so often does, with philosophy. Instead of delivering some School of Athens-style philosophical fan art, Klimt gives us this mysterious image. On the left, we see a column of figures ranging from children at the top to elderly at the bottom. Their twisting, contorted forms don't exactly evoke knowledge or rationality. Instead, they seem anguished, confused, and lost. These figures are contrasted with a void on the right, comprised of more decorative brushwork and a Sphinx-style face, which symbolizes the pursuit of knowledge. At the bottom, another face stares at us, eyes wide, perhaps evoking the clarity of knowledge, or maybe a Medusa-like paralysis that the pursuit of that knowledge may bring. All in all, this piece is quite ambiguous. Unlike past depictions of philosophy, its figures have no clear-cut meaning. Their allegories are vague and uncertain. There's not even any lads in togas. They're all just floating around in the nip. Rather than glorifying the philosophers and their rational pursuit of knowledge, this work seems instead to be critical of them, pointing out the irrational and ultimately unknowable nature of the world philosophers spend their careers trying to categorize. Naturally, they hated it, and an open letter signed by the heads of the department was circulated, officially refusing the work. Despite the negative response, Klimt unveiled the next part the following year, medicine. Here we see more floating figures, this time representing the flow of life from birth to death, which we can see from the presence of adults, children, a pregnant woman, and a skeleton. On the left, a female figure is drifting away from the stream, symbolizing death. Her arm, the one reaching out to her, symbolized the efforts of medicine to preserve life. At the bottom, the figure draped in dark lines and holding a cup and a snake represents Hygeia, daughter of the god of medicine. With her back turned to the flow, she seems rather ambivalent about the mass of teeming humanity behind her and its endless course towards death. As you can imagine, the doctors were just as irate as the philosophers. To them, this work seemed derogatory of their advances, for rather than showing the healing of the sick, it dwells on the inevitability of death. It seems to imply the limitations of medicine rather than its advances. This led to another uproar, and you would think that Klimt would have learned his lesson by now. But after a good long break, in 1907, he finally presented the final part of his trilogy, jurisprudence, the most outright confrontational image of the tree. The male figure in the center stands accused. His contorted pose signifies castration, internment, and a loss of freedom. The octopus that holds him, and the three female figures representing the furies of Greek mythology, seem to suggest there is no way out. The portrayal of the three furies is interesting, as they all betray behaviours we would not like to see in those tasked with doling out justice. One seems to be asleep on the job, while another stares with a vengeful expression. The third seems to be winking, perhaps indicating some sort of under-the-table deal, not something we typically draw attention to in high-minded depictions of justice. Above it all, and far removed from the act of punishment itself, are three figures who represent the concepts of truth, justice, and law. Their distance and aloofness from the sentencing evokes ideas of justice that are once again less than flattering.
Hold on.
Now, you may have noticed something of a theme emerging here. All three of these paintings, instead of proclaiming how great these institutions are, as was the job of artists in such matters for centuries, seemed instead to be dead set on criticising them. What's more, their dreamlike style, decorative brushwork, and unusual depictions of the human form all evoke scorn from their audiences for their ambiguity. These weren't clear-cut images proclaiming the truth of the university's studies. They were instead critical and probing. They sought to challenge rather than reassure, and so naturally, the university refused all three, decrying their criticality and their unabashed depictions of non-classical nudity as degenerate. Meanwhile, poor old Franz Macht, who'd been tasked with the subject of theology for his own work, was painting some lovely angels and probably just wanted to get paid. Due to all the controversy, Klimt had to return his own fee and narrowly avoided a sticky financial situation when some of his private patrons offered to buy the rejected works for their own collections. There they remained until their destruction during World War II, which is why we're looking at black and white photos of them now. The whole thing was quite damaging to Klimt professionally, though he didn't seem all that bothered. As we can see in this piece, he painted in response to what would become known as the University Affair. Now titled Goldfish, its initial name was To My Critics. This kind of attitude would have been professional suicide in previous eras, but Klimt was actually pretty secure thanks to a network of new wealthy patrons who, far from being scandalized by his works, were actually big fans of them. These patrons, many of whom were Jewish businessmen, or more specifically their wives, were drawn to Klimt's works as an alternative to the traditional high culture of the era, which they were often forbidden from participating in. Their support would allow Klimt to continue painting in his ever more modern style and caused him to move away from creating public artworks in favour of private commissions instead. No longer bound by paycheck or public taste, Klimt's later works would fully indulge in his love of patterns, increasingly brazen depictions of sexuality, and perhaps, most famously of all, his inclination for gold. Gold held a special significance for Klimt. His father had been a goldsmith, and he was familiar with the material, but it also evoked connections to the gold leaf of religious icons and decorative Byzantine mosaics. His clients, many of whom were themselves Nouveau riche recent additions to the ruling class, were similarly enamored with the metal, its shiny surface having long held connotations of wealth and alchemic transformation from a lower form to a higher one. Encouraged by this shared fascination, Klimt would lash on the gold in these later pieces, leading to some of his most iconic works, in every sense of the word. A well-known example of this is this full-length portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer, prominent fixture of the Vienna social scene and longtime patron of Klimt, who in addition to funding his works also frequently posed for them. In this painting, we see her seated against a flat golden background, sporting an expression so subtle and enigmatic that it has been compared to the Mona Lisa. The only visible parts painted in oil are her face, arms, and shoulders, with everything else subsumed beneath the overwhelming gold. Its opulence evokes wealth, power, and beauty, as well as drawing parallels with those religious icons of old, framing Adele with the sort of importance that was previously reserved only for saints. All that gold, however, also does something else to the image. Its shiny surface makes creating realistic space and shadow nigh on impossible, and so Klimt doesn't even bother to suggest them. Instead, he embraces the flat and decorative qualities of his materials over the surface appearance of reality. This leaves Klimt with a lot more room for his patterns, which fill much of this flattened space. Swirls, curves, lines, and squares, even a few triangles and some eyes that will no doubt get the conspiracy theorists going. These patterns, in addition to being aesthetically pleasing, also have a symbolic weight all their own, alluding as they often do to Klimt's other great interest besides gold, sex, and eroticism. These patterns and their contrasting round and angular shapes carry allusions to ideas of gender, sexuality, conception, and pregnancy, topics which are still very much taboo for art at the time, but which Klimt was nonetheless fascinated by. Their presence in many of his works covering figures who, rumour has it, he often painted naked first, further implies this meaning, not to mention their, at times, suspicious similarity to medical drawings from the time of the human reproductive system. Sexuality, and in particular female sexuality, is what you might politely call a central theme for Klimt, which can get him into a bit of trouble today, as many of his works can seem to be typical male gaze style fantasies, the female body rendered for a male viewer's enjoyment. This is of course true. Klimt was indeed a big fan of the female form. The trail of suspiciously hairy babies he left in his wake attests to that. There may, however, be more to these works than we might at first assume, as their for the time scandalous subjects often reflect the influence of new emerging ideas of individualism, sexuality, and the psychological understanding of it that would go on to reshape our conceptions of what it is to be human in the coming century. Nude figures in art were of course nothing new. That wasn't really the issue. The demure classical nudes of the Berg Theatre murals, for example, had been quite all right by the standards of the day, whereas by contrast, the unusual twisting forms of the university paintings and the mere presence of pubic hair in the Beethoven Freeze had elicited shock from Klimt's critics. So imagine the reaction to works like this one, titled Athena, which depicts the once again mythological subject of the daughter of the king of Argos in the middle of a coital moment with Zeus, here depicted as a long block from Tetris. This subject no doubt appealed to Klimt due to the unfortunately termed golden shower, which Zeus took the form of, a part of the myth which gives him a chance to once again incorporate his favourite material. While the scene may be clothed, as it were, in the trappings of Greek myth, its depiction of Athena is anything but traditional. Unlike the muted reclining figures of past representations of this story, Klimt's version unambiguously places the emphasis on Athena herself and the sexuality that is central to the tale. Rather than implying it through allegory or the tasteful arrangement of angels, as past versions have done, this work puts the theme of sexuality front and centre by close-cropping the composition around Athena herself to draw emphasis. Klimt's Art Nouveau-inspired stylized figure drawing also helps differentiate this work, from her pose to her expression to her exaggerated proportions, all show an abandonment of the traditionally acceptable methods of painting the human form in favour of something that is much more expressive and, despite its stylization, in some ways more real. This is because, unlike most of Viennese society, which regarded women as second-class citizens at best and the existence of their sexuality as something unfit for public acknowledgement, Klimt instead sees it as a vital part of being human. As such, his depictions of the subject frequently evoke a psychological depth to his figures that was severely lacking in the representations of previous eras. By embracing the aspects of the human mind that a repressive culture like that of Vienna refused to acknowledge, Klimt's work displays a greater depth of emotion and expression than was possible before. We can also see a similar effect in many of his less explicit works too, such as the many portraits of his patrons, whom he depicts in strikingly modern ways, placing them front and centre on the canvas and using their body language and facial expressions to convey to us subtleties of their inner lives that academic approaches often quite literally glossed over. Partially responsible for all of this is Freud, who, despite holding many insane ideas about women, sex, and just about everything else, had inadvertently kicked off much discussion of these topics in the drawing rooms and parlours of Vienna, which Klimt himself would probably have been privy to. This includes not just issues of sexuality and suffrage, but also how artists were to properly represent them, and saw many of Vienna's austere mustachioed gentlemen taking the position that works such as Klimt's were dangerous to traditional structures of power. For in their eyes, they gave emphasis to the feminine over the masculine. Klimt, for his part, said little but painted much when it came to these topics, though his enthusiastic adoption of modernism and role in the secession suggests he held no particular fondness for the old hierarchies his works were seen as going against. These images are, of course, complicated, and they have many aspects, both positive and negative, that are worthy of discussion. But I mention all of this not to defend or condemn, but to widen the context, and to show that these works are more complicated than we may at first assume. They reflect social trends and new ideas that had their genesis in Vienna at the time, and would have big implications for modern art and the modern world. To finish up, let's take a look at one last work by Klimt that demonstrates the complex depiction of sexuality in his works. Probably the most famous piece by Klimt, The Kiss, an iconic symbol of love that may, upon closer inspection, be anything but. This well-known Golden Period work contains two figures, a large male, who is wearing the face off a smaller female figure entangled in his grasp. While this is often taken to be a demonstration of reciprocal affection by greeting card companies and the like, if we look closer, the figures contain some hints of a less than desirable exchange occurring. The man's head extends and cranes into the woman's face in a manner that looks a little bit distorted and perhaps even disturbing. Meanwhile, the receiver of his affections betrays signs that she may not be so welcoming of his embrace. Her curled fingers and tense toes betray her discomfort. Both figures are draped in Klimt's symbolic language, evoking conception, and the strange composition with the phallic shape they form would no doubt have appealed to Freud. But the subtext of the work is much more complicated than a simple expression of love. It could just as easily be an expression of an unwanted advance as a welcome one. This ambiguity seems intentional. Klimt was, as we have seen, well able to portray such subject matter clearly, and yet in this most famous work, he doesn't. Instead, its somewhat sinister undercurrent seems to imply a psychological approach that is more concerned with the subtext than the surface appearance. This approach prefigures much of what is to come in modern art, as depictions of the human form and just about everything else become more nuanced, inscrutable, and twistingly complex in tandem with the modern world itself, which perhaps explains why this work has become such an icon of modern art.
Roofers are furious about this new metal roofing product that's going viral.
Anybody
and
need
right
a metal
now,
roof?
applications are being accepted for...
What was that?
Anybody need a metal roof?
Many aspects of his works, from his Art Nouveau-inspired decoration to his unflinching depictions of sexuality to his love of gold, are indeed quite iconic, and I mean that in every sense of the word. Most crucially, in terms of their frequent resemblance to religious icons of old that comprise so much of European art history. For centuries, golden images of Christ, the saints, and anyone with enough money and power really, comprised much of the art production of the continent. And while this is not surprising, considering the church were the ones footing the bill for it all, it also points to where the cultural power lay, with the bishops, cardinals, and popes. By Klimt's time, as we saw, this was more or less no longer the case. He couldn't get a university to buy his work, never mind the Vatican. The church, like the aristocratic circles of old Vienna, were not interested in these non-traditional works, but luckily for Klimt, there was some people who were interested, mainly those new wealthy patrons like Adele. These patrons, many of whom came from families who had made their money not in the wars of centuries past, but in the new, though often no less ignoble pursuits of industry, business, and banking, were by no means religious, but they did understand the power of the image and the symbolism of gold. In Klimt's paintings, the signifiers of power previously reserved for religious subjects are, for the first time, transferred to this new class of people, the wealthy urban bourgeois, who were rapidly rising to power and replacing the old patronage systems of church and state. In the coming decades, this new system of patronage from wealthy individuals would become the norm, eventually leading us to the creation of the art market as we know it today, and the reimagining of the artwork itself as a new kind of secular icon, and more importantly, as a commodity, one that would in part come to replace the very gold that Klimt had used. Klimt didn't live to see any of this, however. He died in 1918 from an indeterminate combination of Spanish flu and a stroke, having spent the last years of his life reducing the ornate pattern of his golden period and focusing more on anatomical studies of the human form, no part of which he deemed off limits, and which predictably saw him labeled as a pornographer by his critics. In fairness to these critics, showing some of these works would probably get me kicked off YouTube, so they may not have been exaggerating. In those final years, Klimt had taken to mentoring young painters who, inspired by his works and the secessionist movement, came to see him as the leading figure of the Viennese avant-garde. Legend has it that one day, while sitting in his garden, Klimt was surprised to be confronted by one of these artists, a spindly young man with a somewhat anxious air, who had broken into the older painter's home to ask him a simple yet desperate question common to many young artists, which was, "Do I have any talent?" Klimt's answer must have been yes, as the young man, Egon Schiele, would become his protege, and the works he produced during his short and difficult life, which lead us to the birth of Expressionism, will be the subject of our next video. So I hope you'll join me then, and thanks for watching.
There we go.
Wow.
Hey, anybody got any thoughts about that?
Nuts.
Hang on one second. Close that. Okay, good. All right, no more commercials. You don't have to be subjects, to somebody trying to sell you metal roofs or, solar panels or anything else for the rest of the day. How about that?
That'd be good on your new house.
Yeah.
They improve the solar panels and the metal roof.
Oh yeah. No, I'm perfectly open to talking to them. That's why they keep showing up on here. because I've actually, had conversations with them at this point. So, but
they always talk.
Yes.
They always refer to this art as modern art. So when do you stop saying this modern art? Because now we're in the modern day and age during our particular period. So, you know, that was their age, and for as they were concerned, that was modern art. Now we have modern art today, but it looks somewhat different than their modern art. Is that kind of like a standard?
Well, okay.
I mean, if you're going to say, what is modern art?
Okay.
Is it of the period you were living in, or the period that was previous, a century ago?
Okay. So let me help you with that. Okay. The reason they call it modern art is it's probably the period of time in which you had, you know, you're looking at the late 1800s, you know, from about 1860 through about really about 1920. And you can pretty much so draw a line that from really about that period of time onward, you know, painting had changed, sculpture had changed, art in general had changed, for the very reasons that he was talking about, which is really up until that point, it was, you know, in most parts of the world, it was the aristocracy and or the church who was commissioning the artwork. And so they dictated the style and the content, what you could talk about, how you could say things up until that period of time. Really right around about the 1860s in Paris, and then later in Vienna, and around about the probably about 1870s to 1890s, society began to change. And you had this new burgeoning middle class and what they call Nouveau riche, which were, you know, industrialists and business people and things who had become quite wealthy. And all of a sudden, you know, they could buy, you know, and commission works from artists. And so that set artists free, in a sense, to paint things that really dealt with, you know, more contemporary life, you know, life as it was at the time. And they weren't stuck in the past, and they weren't doing, you know, paintings out of the Renaissance over and over and over again, and dealing with religious themes and things, because that's not what the clientele was then dictating or asking for. And so it really was you know, it was really like day and night, you know, from that point forward, and art changed forever, you know. Now, are there still painters who paint for the Vatican today? Sure. Okay. Are there painters who still, you know, paint for institutions like universities and, you know, things like that? Absolutely. Yes. You know, but the vast majority of the art created today is more personal, and it's not created to fill a need to more or less hold up a viewpoint or propaganda for an institution, right? So that's what made it modern, right? Now, since then, there have been other art movements. You know, there's art being created today that doesn't have anything to do with that period of time. And is it contemporary or modern? Yes, to the time that it's in. What it will be labeled as, we don't know yet. We won't know maybe for another 100 to 200 years. And some historian will look back and they'll call this the whatever period. You know, but that particular time, okay, you know, at that particular time, that was really the beginning of what we call modern art. Because if that had never happened, we would still be doing iconic figures for churches, right? And that's the difference right there. So now, he threw out several different names, right? Like Art Nouveau, the Jugendstil, Sessionist. All of those are art movements, right? And if you look up any of those art movements, you'll go back and see the work of people like Klimt and Egon Schiele, and you'll get into the Bauhaus and all these different movements, even the arts and crafts movement, for that matter of fact, which predated it. And in fact, that's probably something I should mention. You can blame modern art actually on the arts and crafts movement. You really can. A lot of art historians don't link those directly, but if it had not been for the arts and crafts movement, which was really an uprising of craftsmen against the industrialization and production or mass production of furniture, textiles, silverware, things like that happened in the early 1800s in England. If that had never happened, you wouldn't have had modern art.
Is that where we get all that fancy architecture?
Yeah.
We get beautiful architecture.
Yeah. Well,
not just straight lines.
Yeah. Well, you had the arts and crafts movement, which, again, the idea of that particular group of craftsmen and artists were rather, and think about this, how odd this sounds now. Okay. You have mid-century England, a group of craftsmen who are rebelling against large manufacturers of, mass manufactured furnishings, such as, furniture and stuff like that. And
Yes.
they want to go back and create something that has beauty and aesthetics and value, not just the fact that we can spit out 400 of them today, right?
Yes.
And you see, that's what was happening, is that, you had gone from a society where people made their own furniture, or they had local craftsmen make pieces of furniture and things for their house, into the fact that everybody moved into the city and became a factory worker or worked at a bank or something like that. And they bought their furniture, from companies who could mass produce them. And, so everybody had one, everybody had a, a dresser that looked a certain way, because they literally spit thousands and thousands of them out at a time. And that had never been done before. And so these craftsmen, looked at that and said, yeah, we're losing something here. We're losing, the aesthetics. We're, losing, the beauty of the materials and things like that. And so they rebelled, just like the Impressionists rebelled against the establishment, in France, and, traditional painting processes, and was looking for something new. So, the arts and crafts movement kind of started it. And, I hate to kind of admit it, but it was actually the Scottish who were the bad boys who started all of this, because, the arts and crafts movement actually started in Scotland and spread to England, and then went to France, and they called it Art Nouveau. And then from there it went to Austria, and it became the Jugendstil. And then of course it went to the Americas as well, and not just North America, also South America. And there were, art movements in all of those places. And in fact, it went as far as finding its way back to China and Japan and India. And they had their own modern art movements, around that same period of time, with those same basic principles and ideals, which were, let's get back to making things of high quality and craft and beauty. And so it literally spawned a worldwide art revolution, you know, and that's how we got to where we are today.
Well, with the new industrialists and people making lots of money, employers and stuff, they could afford those kind of things then.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it really helped out with the emerging middle class.
Yeah. Well, anywhere that you had an emerging middle class, you know, and because I mean, previous to that time, you had the people that were in power, and they were up here, and they had all the money and the power, and they ran everything. And then you had the people who were the poor, and you know, they were mainly peasants and farmers, and you know, some of them were craftsmen, you know, but they were the vast majority of people, but they had nothing or very little, you know, and in a lot of cases couldn't even own a piece of land or a property or own a house. They lived in a house that was basically given to them or assigned to them, you know, by their overlord, you know.
Yes.
And so they were always beholding, you know, to that individual. Well, later on, that individual became a company. Like, for example, in this country, you have the state of West Virginia. Everybody knows about West Virginia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, West Virginia. Well, no. You had a lot of people coming from Europe. They ended up in West Virginia because of the coal mines, and all of the houses and things that were built in West Virginia were built by the coal companies. They built everything there, and if you lived in that town, that company owned you, because your parents, you know, who were working in the mine, they were indebted to them for everything in their life, including the clothes on your back, the school that you went to, if you got any medical care, if you got any food, you know, that all came from the coal company. So you see.
What about Hershey, New York?
Well, same thing, you know, same model. Mm-hmm. You know, it was done everywhere in the Industrial Revolution. You know, a lot of the people who left the farms, you know, small homesteads and things in this country, and went to places like Chicago and, you know, Cincinnati and, you know, big cities, went there to go work in those factories. And those factories owned you. I mean, literally, you know, I mean, they not only owned you, they owned your children. And that's why they had children working 16 and 18-hour days, you know, up until, we had some fairly major labor revolts, you know, back in, I think that was like, I think it actually started in around about the 1880s, you know, but it really didn't, you know, catch on and become kind of a nationwide thing and really until the early 1900s. And, you know, and then you had labor laws, you know, that actually, you know, were written, and it limited companies' power then to, you know, really basically keep people as indentured servants in this country. So, and not only here, really all around the world. So there were similar movements to that. So yeah, and that's the beauty of art, is that, you know, art's all about history and it's all interconnected, you know? And if you begin to understand what was happening in art and in society at the same time, you know, then you can see how that all kind of ties in with, you know, how we live today. And, you know, and quite frankly, you know, for as much progress as we've made, in many ways, we haven't moved very far forward, and there's a lot further to go. So, yeah, just my humble opinion. So, anyhow.
I have one last question.
Yeah.
Does because Gustav Klimt, he painted a lot of paintings with gold and silver or silver. Are his paintings more expensive because of that now?
No.
That increase the value of them? No?
Not really. Yeah. No. It's not, you know, the physical material, the gold itself, you know, has some value, but the actual value of Klimt's work is really what it tells us historically about that society and about the rapid change. Okay. I've talked about Vienna, you know, in the past, and you know, we just went through a summer where we had like major upheavals in cities like Minneapolis, right? Where you had riots, and well, even Portland, Oregon, and Seattle. Now take that very same situation and put it back in the 1800s, because that's what was happening in Vienna. Because you had a very staunch old aristocracy who was very set in its ways. And you had this new burgeoning middle class who wanted the world to change. And that aristocracy was losing their grip on the world as they knew it. And Vienna at the time had probably been, even today, it would make us blush at how open a society that was. Homosexuality was, you know, they didn't blink twice about it. You know, their viewpoints, you know, socially and sexually, and, you know, their roles of genders and things like that. Yeah, they just, you know, they all just went away. And there for about a 40-year period, Vienna was, you know, a pretty wild and crazy place. So, and no place on earth has ever been like that or ever will probably be again. I'm serious. I mean, it was, if you go back and you read about some of the stuff that was going on there, it was, you know, wild and crazy even by today's standards, you know. So, you know, it definitely was a big shakeup of what society was or could be, and there was a lot of questioning going on. And, you know, the things that kind of spun out of that were, some of them were very good and useful. And at the same time, you know, you also had things that were very destructive. You know, he mentioned the fascist movement, right? Which was a backlash against all of this very kind of open society. And, you know, you had Adolf Hitler there in Vienna as a young art student who, you know, basically got some ideas that he didn't like a lot of what was going on around him. You know, he didn't like seeing a lot of that stuff. So, you know, he helped form the Nazi Party and, you know, put an end to a lot of that. So, you know, that's just history. So, anyhow, anybody got, oh, well, there's only 5 of us left. Wow. Okay. So I guess we'll be back here at 2 o'clock, and we'll look at some of the work that I've got from you guys. If you need to send something in, send it in. But we'll also, you know, answer some of the questions like the one that Surin asked, and we'll kind of go through how you can make a painting better. Okay, even if it's done by a master, they can always get better. So, okay. So we'll see you at 2. Bye.
Bye.